The Pantheon is an engineering marvel of the ancient Roman Empire. It's built by Hadrian, Trajan's chosen successor. We get a series of emperors here who will choose their successor rather than using simple family connection to do so. And Hadrian loved art, literature, and Greek culture. What makes the Pantheon so famous, of course, is its dome. And this dome is immense. Now, domes are basically arches that have been spun. So it's the same basic concept of an arch. The more weight we put on top of it, the stronger it becomes. Although in this case, they're doing something a little different. And there's two forms of stress happening when we are working with an arch. We have compression and tension. So the outside wants to push, or the lower part of the dome wants to push out, while the upper part of the dome wants to push in. That's what you're seeing up here. And then what we see are hoop stresses. In other words, it wants to push out, wants to push down, just like an arch. So you're seeing the same basic principle in both of these. Now, the Pantheon was developed as round. Here we see a recreation of what it may have looked like earlier in its history. And it was meant as a temple to 12 of the gods, giving them equality, hence the fact that it's round. Historically, it's a very influential structure. It influences the dome at the cathedral in Florence. It really is going to be influential to Jefferson. We're going to see it at Monticello, at the University of Virginia Rotunda, at the original U.S. Capitol building, although those domes are less obvious today. And it was built of concrete. And not just concrete. And the concrete can be as much as 20 feet thick in areas of the Pantheon. But we see levels of concrete. So they're mixing it with different things to give it different weights and different characteristics. As we move up, especially in the dome, we move from brick all the way up to tufa, which is very similar in this case to pumice. So they're trying to create a very lightweight dome as they move higher in the structure. Outside, we see Corinthian columns being used, borrowing from the Greeks, as well as that typical Greek and Roman temple front, with that typical Roman deep front porch. The inside is going to be quite innovative. As we look at it, that inner dome would have been covered in bronze originally. That's all at St. Peter's in the Baldacchino today. They borrowed it for their own construction later on. But it's an incredible engineering feat because you get this massive open structure, something that we typically would associate with sport domes today. But then religion is going to be where you're going to see the largest gatherings of people in an interior space. So it makes sense it's used in a religious context. The whole thing is built basically as a sphere, or half a sphere, sort of maybe 2/3 of a sphere. And the idea is to equalize the forces on that dome. So it is sort of an ideal dome, especially from the inside. And they would have created a mold inside of it and then poured the concrete around it, making use of the plastic qualities of concrete to fill in any shape or space. At the top, we see the oculus, which is this opening in the top. First of all, it allows for the gods to more or less have access to the building. And there was a time when you could actually go to the top of it. It's also a very heavy ring, and what it does is it creates compression on the rest of the dome, strengthening the dome, and it's why we have this dome that's 2,000 years old and still standing. We do see drainage inside because, of course, the oculus would allow rainwater into the structure, or snow in some cases. Snow isn't incredibly common in Rome, but it does happen. The floor as well as the walls are covered in a marble veneer, and we see a very symbolic interior, that round interior, so that none of the gods are actually at the center. The exterior of the dome has these steps on the outside. Inside them are chains, and those are there for compression, to push in on the dome, because obviously the dome wants to push out at this lower level. So you're fighting that through the use of extra weight and the use of chains. Inside, what you get is this continuous dome. Of course, most people aren't going to see the dome from the outside. They're going to usually come across it from the interior. So it's more finished and smoother, as we saw with previous illustrations. The sun also acts as a clock or a calendar, giving us that impression of the time of year. Obviously, the sun shining in through the oculus. Later, this would be converted to a church because, of course, it's a major center of Rome. And we're going to see some famous people, including a Ninja Turtle by the name of Raphael, who are going to be buried inside the Pantheon when it's a church.